Please disregard the mess. I am sitting in my kid's room. Today I'm going to be talking about this book here. This is Personal Recollections of a Cavalryman with Custer's Michigan Brigade in the Civil War. This is by James Kidd. Now, Kidd was at the University of Michigan when the Civil War broke out. And at the conclusion of his sophomore year, he received authorization by Kellogg, who was I think he was a congressman, to put together the 6th Michigan Cavalry. So he organizes that. And then they go down to, or they report to this was in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Then Grand Rapids, Michigan, they receive orders to go to Washington, D.C., to the nation's capital. And they're there late 1862 until they go down into Virginia early in February of 1863. Really not a whole lot happens up until through that time, until, I want to say around the end of June in 1863, Custer takes over command of the brigade, and it's at Hanover where Kidd sees him for the first time. So Kidd has a description here. He says, "It was here that the brigade first saw Custer as the men of the 6th, armed with their Spencer rifles, were deployed forward across the railroad in a wheat field beyond. I heard a voice new to me, directly in the rear of the portion of the line where I was, giving directions for the movement, in clear, resonant tones, and in a calm, confident manner, at once resolute and reassuring. Looking back to see whence it came, my eyes were instantly riveted upon a figure of only a few feet distant, whose appearance amazed, if it did not for the moment amuse me. It was he who was giving the orders. At first I thought he might be a staff officer conveying the commands of his chief, but it was at once apparent that he was giving the orders, not delivering them, and that he was in command of the line." He goes on to give a description of what Custer looks like, which basically is how he appears on the cover of this book here. Again, this is Custer Victorious by Greg Irwin, and he cites this book as a primary document quite often, as does Greg, what was his name? Greg Wittenberg? Eric Wittenberg. Eric Wittenberg wrote a book on Sheridan. He referenced this book quite a bit as well, so I thought, if these guys are all using this book, I'm going to go ahead and read it. Before I go any further, here is the USBN. If you want to pause the video right here so you can get that. But this book said on the back cover that it has a photo insert, and there's no photos in the book at all, which I found very disappointing. So if you want to know what Kidd looks like, here is James Kidd right there. He would go on to command the brigade after Custer was transferred to another division towards the end of the Civil War. Kidd was the brigade commander. Kidd goes on here to say about Custer. This would be interesting. He says, "The popular idea of Custer is a misconception. He was not a reckless commander. He was not regardless of human life. No man could have been more careful of the comfort and lives of his men. His heart was tender as that of a woman. He was kind to his subordinates, tolerant of their weaknesses, always ready to help and encourage them. He was brave as a lion, fought as few men fought, but it was from no love of it. Fighting was his business, and he knew that by that means alone could peace be conquered. He was brave, alert, untiring, a hero in battle, relentless in the pursuit of a beaten enemy, stubborn and full of resources on retreat. His tragic death at the Little Bighorn crowned his career with tragic interest that will not wane while history and tradition endure. Hundreds of brave men shed tears when they heard of it, men who had served under and learned to love him in the trying times of Civil War. I have always believed that some of the real facts of the Battle of the Little Bighorn were unknown. Probably the true version of the massacre will remain a sealed book until the dead are called upon to give up their secrets. And he goes on to give his opinion of the Civil War, basically praising Custer, praises Custer throughout the entire memoir, which is a very orderly memoir, very detailed. Kid would go on to become a newspaper man. So, I mean, he does a fantastic job of collecting records of the rebellion and, you know, the testimony or written statements of generals and officers throughout here to construct his memoir himself. And it's one of the better ones I've read. In fact, it may be one of the best memoirs out there. So I'd highly recommend this. Throughout the book, he goes on to praise several others besides just Custer. He has a lot of praise for David M. Gregg and really sings his praises throughout the book. I mean, he has the highest respect for David M. Gregg. And Gregg, you know, he ended up resigning his commission towards the end of the war. Basically, he said that he lost the nerve to fight, and he considered himself a coward, which is untrue. I don't believe that Gregg was a coward at all. It's a shame that his name is not more well known, because his actions throughout this book, you see time and time again that Gregg was a very capable and able cavalry officer and performed his duty admirably. His record's impeccable. Of course, it's not all praises. He has a lot of criticism of Judson Kilpatrick. Now, General Kilpatrick, Kid here was on the failed Richmond raid, and he writes about it. And I believe he was shot in the foot on that raid, if I'm not mistaken. Anyways, that raid was a fiasco. And following the raid, Kilpatrick was transferred out west to Sheridan. Or not Sheridan, but Sherman, General Sherman. He joins him. And here is Kilpatrick right there. Kilpatrick is also known as Kill Cavalry because of the fact that his orders often resulted in the death of many a fine cavalry officer and trooper. Again, the photos in there, these are from Custer Victorious, which I've reviewed already. Highly recommend that book. But this is a very fine memoir. So, eventually, Alfred Pleasanton gets transferred out west, and Kid has very nice things to say about Alfred Pleasanton as well. General Pleasanton, he has high regard for him, and he really does respect Philip Sheridan as well. However, it becomes apparent reading this that Kid very politely and gentlemanly offers criticisms from time to time of Sheridan's actions. So that is one of the things of note in here, and perhaps this is the reason why Eric Wittenberg's last book that I read, maybe it carries more weight than one would initially think. So, yeah, there's an opportunity following Winchester, I believe it's 3rd Winchester, where Kid says, look, Sheridan, if he would have attacked I think it was the left flank or the right flank. Hold on, I'll see if I can find it. Okay, so here it is. It's on page 208. In this battle here, Kid receives an injury to the leg, and then a fragment of a shell strikes his horse Billy. He says, in the nose, taking out a chunk the size of my fist. And he carried this scar till the day of his death in 1888. This last charge finished the battle. Jubal Early, Confederate general, retreated through Winchester up the valley, and nothing was left but to pursue. Sheridan broke Early's left flank by the movement of the cavalry from his own right. It was the first time that proper use of this arm had been made in a great battle during the war. He was the only general of that war who knew how to make cavalry and infantry supplement each other in battle. But here's the criticism. So he praises and he says this. Had the tactics of the battle been reversed, that is to say, if Sheridan had moved against Early's right flank instead of his left, nothing could have prevented the capture or destruction of Early's army, and his retreat would have been cut off. But the way to the south was left open, and Early escaped once more to Fisher's Hill, where he was found the next day with the remnant, a very respectable remnant of his army. So there is a criticism offered with a praise. So this is, I just can't praise this account enough. This was a very good memoir, and there is one further incident that I will read you here if I can find it. So this is concerning Sheridan's burning of the Shenandoah Valley. He says here at Port Republic, while occupying this position, it's a picket line, okay, that extends a distance of 20 miles. While occupying this position, the discovery was made that there were several good grist mills among the river that were also well stored with grist. There were plenty of men in the brigade who were practical millers, and putting them in charge, I had all the mills running very early in the morning, grinding flour and meal, which the commissaries were proceeding to issue to the several regiments, according to their needs. And we all flattered ourselves that we were doing a fine stroke of business. This complacent state of mind was rudely disturbed when about 7 o'clock, the mills had been running some 2 hours or more, General Merritt, accompanied by his staff, dashed up and in an angry mood which he did not attempt to conceal began to reprimand me because the mills had not been set on fire. The flat had gone forth from the general himself that everything in the valley that might contribute to the support of the army must be destroyed before the country was abandoned. Sheridan had already decided another retrograde movement down the valley, and it was his purpose to leave a trail of fire behind, obeying the letter, the injunction of the general and the chief to starve out any crow that would hereafter have the temerity to fly over the Shenandoah Valley. The order had gone out the day before, and the work was beginning that morning. Custer was to take the west and Merritt the east and burn all barns, mills, haystacks, etc., within a certain area. Merritt was provoked. He pointed to the west, and one could have made a chart of Custer's trail by the columns of black smoke which marked it. The general was manifestly fretting lest Custer should appear to outdo him in zeal in obeying orders, and blame me as his responsible subordinate for the delay. I told him, with an appearance of humility, that I am sure was unfeigned, that those mills would never grind again after what had passed. The wheels were not stopped, but the torch was applied, and the crackling of flames intermingled with the rumbling of the stones made a mournful requiem as the old mills went up in smoke, and General Merritt's loyalty was vindicated. It was a disagreeable business, and we can be frank now, I did not relish it. One incident made a lasting impression on the mind of every man who was there. The mill in the little hamlet of Port Republic contains the means of livelihood, the food of the women and children, whom the exigencies of war had bereft of their natural providers, and when they found that it was the intention to destroy that in which their very existence seemed to depend, their appeals to be permitted to have some of the flour before the mill was burned were heart-rending. Worse than all else, in spite of the most urgent precautions enjoined upon the officers in charge, the flames extended. The mill stood in the midst of a group of wooden houses, and some of them took fire. Seeing the danger, I rode across and ordered every man to fall in and assist in preventing the further spread of the flames, an effort which was, happily, successful. What I saw there is burned into my memory. Women, with children in their arms, stood in the street and gazed frantically upon the threatened ruin of their homes, while the tears rained down their cheeks. The anguish pictured in their faces would have melted any heart not seared by the horrors and necessities of war. It was too much for me, and at the first moment that duty would permit, I hurried away from the scene. General Merritt did not see these things, nor did General Sheridan, much less General Grant. So, the atrocities of war. This is one of the reasons why the Civil War fascinates me, is because this is what the Union, and I'm not saying that there was not atrocities committed by the South either, okay? We can obviously look at Quantrell, the Lawrence Raid. We can look at bushwhackers like Bloody Bill Anderson and the Centralia Massacre, which is absolutely horrific. I mean, I can't even talk to you and speak of the things that the bushwhackers that rode under Bloody Bill did. We're talking about really heinous scalping people and mutilations I cannot even describe to you, okay? Because it's too despicable. But this whole brutality, burning the food, burning the barns, burning fields, taking people's livestock. This was their livelihood, and this was being done to Americans. So I think that there's a level of barbarity that came out of the Civil War, where you see campaigns like what was raged in Shenandoah Valley, and we say, how could the American government do what they did to the American Indian? And we see even today, this idea of total warfare, that we just completely wage war and raise everything to the earth. We destroy all the infrastructure. We knock out electricity and water, and the food is all used up, and people that are refugees fleeing from these areas, they end up starving and not having medical supplies. This is a legacy of the Civil War, a level of just absolute and total barbarity that extends into this day. And I really think in a lot of ways the Civil War is where the American government learned cruelty. So when we hear these complaints about war crimes and these ideas of these accusations of barbarity that take place in other countries, we have to remember it was learned here. This is where America learned to be hateful, was in this conflict. All right, that's all I got for you. Thank you for watching. God bless, and have a wonderful day.